Please welcome Julianne Moore and Monisha Henley, interviewed by Tory Burch.
Columbine, Sandy Hook, Charleston, Orlando, Buffalo, Uvalde. There are so many more. It's hard to even say them out loud. Hopes and prayers are not enough. People want their friends, their families, and their children to stop being killed. The vast majority of Americans agree that something has to be done. And we have two incredible advocates here to talk about this issue and how we can make this moment different. Monisha Smith leads state government affairs at Everytown for Gun Safety. Everytown is a movement of 8 million mothers, mayors, survivors, students, concerned citizens who are working to end gun violence. And aside from so many other things, one thing I truly admire is when people take the lights and attention directed at them and redirect it towards our society's challenges. There is no one that personifies this more than Julianne Moore. She has embraced her position to advocate for groups like Everytown and Moms Demand Action. And thank you so much for both of you being here. I'll start with Monisha. Monisha, this is extremely personal for you. And can you tell us why you got involved with this issue and how you're feeling about it?
Sure. So I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, and I went away to college. I went to a small school in Salisbury, North Carolina, and I was in my sophomore year of college. And it was a Friday night, and we were going to a party. And as I was about to enter the party, I heard gunshots. I didn't even know what I was hearing initially. It just was like pop, 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 and then screams. And then one of my friends came running out of the party, and she said that our friend, Darius Morris, Demo, had been shot. We later would find out that 5 other people had been shot at this party, and Darius would lose his life. I never understood why there was a gun at a college party. They got into an argument over a football game, and somebody lost their life. A couple years later, I was a student government president, and that case was going to trial. And I heard all the details of what happened, how Demo was impacted and how he ultimately lost his life. And I couldn't help but thinking, we didn't just lose Demo that night, we also lost the students who brought that gun, who would be facing incarceration. People don't always think about the ripple effect of gun violence and how this is something that I've carried with me my entire life. When I saw what happened in Virginia Tech, when I saw what just happened in Uvalde, I'm taken back to that night and just think that this is faceless and we need to stop. It has to end. Enough is enough.
And I would imagine that everyone is reliving those moments every single time this happens. Julie, you've been such an outspoken advocate for gun safety for more than a decade. You started and founded Everytown's Creative Council. Why is this so important to you?
Well, it has been exactly a decade. It was December 14th, 2012, and my daughter's school had already broken for their holiday break, and she was 10 years old. And I was going to bring her to work with me that day because, her brother was still in school and I didn't have a babysitter and whatever. I thought it would be a fun day. And the news broke about Sandy Hook. And it was so horrific. And here I was with this little 10-year-old girl, and we got into the van to go to work. I said, please turn the radio off. I don't want her to hear anything about this. And we go to hair and makeup. I'm like, turn the TV off. Nobody talk about this. I don't want her to hear it this way. We went through the entire day. I said, we'll talk about it when we're home and her dad's there and her brother is there and we could talk about it as a family about this horrific experience. I wanted to keep her safe, right? So we were decorating the Christmas tree, and this is also embarrassing. She was 10 years old and she had a phone, but she had an older brother. She'd just gotten this phone, and it was, of course, very carefully monitored, right? Because I'm a good mom, so I'm gonna, I'm really careful. And I'm putting up an ornament, and I'm gonna cry when I said this. She said, "Mommy, did a bunch of little kids get shot today?" And I was so ashamed of myself. Because here I was this entire day trying to keep this little girl safe from this news, and I wasn't doing what I needed to do, which was protect her and everybody else from this horrific violence. And I thought the only way that I was going to do that was by becoming involved in speaking out about gun violence. And I started giving money to Mayor Bloomberg's group, Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and I started kind of speaking out when I did press because I felt like culturally I wanted to do something. And then they eventually merged with Shannon Watts and became Moms Demand Action and Every Time for Gun Safety. And that's when I went to them and I said, what can I do to bring cultural awareness to this issue? How can, and to change our culture around guns? So that's when it started. Because I felt like I wasn't being a good parent if I didn't do it.
I mean, I think there's not a Republican or Democrat that doesn't want this violence to stop. And I think that one hopeful thing now is we think there might be some good news at the federal level. So, Monisha, can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. So folks may be aware that there was a bipartisan framework that was released over the weekend that really goes through multiple steps of what Congress, specifically the US Senate, could do to address the gun violence crisis. It includes things like enhancing background checks for youth under 21. It includes implementation and incentives for extreme risk protective orders, also known as red flag laws, to encourage the 19 states that already have those laws on the books to really make sure they're being properly implemented, and also to encourage other states to pass that important policy. It also includes things like funding for mental health, as well as school safety, and a provision disarming domestic abusers by potentially closing something known as the dating partner loophole. So we're feeling very hopeful, but it does not mean our work is done. We need to make sure we keep the pressure on the Senate to make sure that this framework turns into legislation, and more importantly, a vote, and then gets to the president's desk.
I was thinking about what is the one question that I personally have, and I'm not sure how. I'd like this to be answered, Julie, and then Monisha, but yeah. I almost feel like it's a talking point when someone says, what do you say to someone when they insist that this is not a gun issue, that it's a mental health issue?
Well, mental health is not an American problem, right? The whole world struggles with issues of mental health. It's a human condition, right? But we're the only developed country in the world that has this kind of access to guns. So, one of the things I always say to people, if you remember growing up when people used to keep chemicals underneath the sink, right? Because they'd say, if you put your Drano there, your kid's gonna drink it. Well, people stopped doing that. You limit access to something, and things change. So they just want to talk about anything other than guns. Really, that's what it is. But it's of course, we need resources for mental health, but that's not the issue.
Well, and personally, I think I'm all for supporting mental health issues. Mm-hmm. We know that's a massive issue, but I think that's not one or the other. No. I think it's both. And how about you, Monisha?
I would just add that we don't want to stigmatize the mental health community.
Right.
I think oftentimes people forget that they are more likely to be harmed than they are to create harm. This is really about weakening gun laws and making sure those who are going to create harm, have dangerous behaviors, don't have access to a gun.
For others or themselves.
Exactly.
Gun homicides are a big problem. So it's how do you prevent those? How do you keep people who are a danger to themselves away from firearms?
Yeah, and I guess this ties into what you just said, but you've compared gun violence prevention to how we regulate cars and driving. So Can you just elaborate on that? Because I do love these comparisons.
Right. Well, once again, back to my childhood, I grew up standing up behind my father, hanging on to him while he drove, right? So I think many of us did. We didn't have seatbelts, we didn't have speed limits, we didn't have airbags, we didn't have any kind of regulation. And so as we started to examine, car fatalities, we realized that all of these things would help you know, will keep these from happening. So why don't we treat, you know, a car's a dangerous machine. We didn't eliminate cars, right? We just implemented laws to make it safer.
That's very good analogy. And I'm going to do one more to you and then to you, Monisha. But you, or I guess have you, I'm going to say you because I think you probably have, but have you faced any backlash, consequences of being such an outspoken gun safety advocate personally or in your career, and do you care?
No, I haven't. Yeah, well, but you know, yes, no, I wouldn't care, but no, I haven't. And I think it's really, really important to talk about that because I've received nothing but gratitude. People are like, thank you for speaking about this. Thank you for showing up. Where can I help? What can I do? And that was when I started the Creative Council, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to amass voices who would be willing to speak, to make it safe to speak out about it, because it's not dangerous. Majority of people believe in common sense gun laws, right? The majority of people want this. It's important that we make ourselves known, and there has been absolutely no backlash whatsoever.
That's amazing to hear.
Yeah.
I love that. One frightening statistic that I read recently is access to guns makes it 5 times easier, more likely for an abusive partner to kill a female victim. So can you talk about the correlation between domestic violence and gun violence, Monisha?
Sure. I mean, this is all about access. The fact that if there is a gun in the home and there is an abusive situation that is existing in that home, a woman is more likely to be shot and killed. 1 million women in this country, 1 million women in this country have experienced a gunshot wound because of an intimate partner. And that's absurd. That is not the world that we want to live in. We want to, again, restrict those access, make sure violence is not happening, and more importantly, making sure we have policies in place that protect us from those moments.
And what can we do to help women in the meantime?
Call your senators.
That's right.
That wasn't a setup.
But it is very important to call your senators, but I also just want to say is being an advocate, being a partner, being a friend, listening. We have a lot of resources, speaking up. Yeah. We have a lot of resources at Everytown to be able to identify the signals. This is still one of those issues that we don't talk about. We don't want to always acknowledge when we are in a harmful situation. So really making sure we're being mindful of those things and being the best support that we can.
And I guess this is for both of you as well. Mass shootings make headlines, we know that. But in reality, they represent just a fraction of the shootings in America. Can you paint a fuller picture of gun violence in our country, including who is the most affected?
Sure, so 110 Americans are shot and killed every day. 110 Americans are shot and killed every day. When we're in these moments, you hear about Uvalde, you hear about Buffalo, but we don't hear about the everyday gun violence. And one of the things that you were mentioning is 58% of gun deaths in this country are suicide. Yeah. And that's not happening in our cities, that's happening in rural communities with predominantly white men. And so really understanding that this is all of our issues, it looks different depending on what your circumstances, but this is impacting all of us.
I mean, all of us care. I know it. Everyone I speak with, whenever this happens, it's the most horrifying thing. And we just need to harness that and not let it go. Absolutely. And make sure.
A statistic that really affected me, and I just learned this recently, is that the majority of gun homicides are committed by men between the ages of 18 and 22. So simply raising the legal age to buy a gun would decrease it significantly, right? And once again, I have a son who's 24 years old. I don't think, I can't even imagine, he's of legal age, right? But I can't even imagine somebody,
boys need a little.
Developmentally, right? But so,
Sorry. This is meant to be inclusive of men.
Of everybody, But it's really true. Think about that. 18, for those of us who have 18-year-old children, I mean, we think of them as children. I don't think of them as adults, and yet they're classified that way, right?
Yeah, and I guess just in closing, or even more, if there's anything either of you want to elaborate on, but I think aside from calling your senator, what advice, because I know this is one of those things that all of us feel helpless about, and we want to change this and help, and certainly not take away someone's Second Amendment. I don't think it's about that. It's about having just checks and balances and creating a safe environment. So what can people do?
One of the biggest things that I think is greatly impactful is just talking about it. I think for so long we were scared to talk about gun violence. We were scared to talk about how huge this is in this country and how different we are from the rest of the world. So like having these conversations with your friends, your family, challenging them on their beliefs of like, oh, nothing will ever happen. Like making sure that this feels present. So even when the media is no longer talking about it, we still are, and we're demanding change.
Right. Absolutely, and I think the work that every town in Moms Demand does is tremendous. Joining one of those organizations, contributing or volunteering at a local anti-violence organization in your community, that's very helpful. I think meeting other people who are working on this issue and realizing how important it is to everybody, not forgetting about it, knowing that it affects each and every one of us. Like I said, for you, it happened for you in college. For me, it happened when I felt like I was not protecting my child properly. But this is a personal issue. This is not something that's far away.
Julie, who it hasn't happened to, it happens to me every time I see it.
Absolutely.
And I think we all have to collectively say enough is enough.
Yes.
And thank you very much, both of you, for coming. I know how busy you are. Thank you.
Thank you.